So we are right now on page 317 in the Pines. This is the second volume. So that's part 2, chapter 22. That's where we're up to. And welcome to lecture number 70 of our Mor Nevuchim lectures. I hope to cover chapter 22 and 23 today. I'm going to tell you that 23 is one of my all-time favorites. So I hope we can get there. 22 is we're going to have to put on our medieval philosophical hats again. I apologize, but I said we're going to learn everything, so we got to cover this too. So remember that Rambam is right now describing the debating Aristotle, right? Aristotle had said that the world is eternal, and the basic assumption, the basic argument that Aristotle made is that, and this is a similar argument that many scientists would make today, that the laws of science are the way they are because that's the way they have to be, because those are the laws of science. And one of those laws, according to Aristotle, then, is if everything in the world is the way it is because it has to be, then it always had to be that way. There's no other possibility, which means the world is eternal, right? It was always this way. Now, Aristotle understood that there is some sort of a prime mover, something that makes it all happen, that makes it all go around, but which is Aristotle's conception of God, right? But whatever happened, whatever God created, it happened that way because it had to be that way. And Maimonides differs, right? He says that no, there was a moment of creation, right? And all of those laws of science are absolutely true, just like Aristotle said, and and he agrees with all of the laws as laid out by Aristotle, which was the modern science of his day, right? However, all of that was created by a creator. So these are the two conflicting ideas. So what Rambam is trying to do is explain to us why his understanding, the world having a creator, is better than Aristotle's. Now, what we're going to find in this chapter 22, if you pick up only one thing, it's the following, and it's not the first time. He mentioned it several times already, and that is the following. Everything that we see in this world, which according to Rambam is underneath the sphere of the moon, right? Which is what we see around us, right? Because remember, everything according to the Aristotelian physiology is these big spheres. So the lowest sphere nearest the Earth is the moon. So underneath the sphere of the moon is, according to Rambam or according to Aristotle and their scientific view of the world, that's the world that we see. Rambam basically understood that all of that makes sense. We understand how it all works, right? He told us the four elements and how certain elements go up, certain elements down. We talked about the ideas of form versus Homer versus Tzura, form versus matter, and so on. So he explained to us how science works, at least according to the physiology of his day. But according to Rambam, Aristotle's, all of his explanations, everything that makes sense underneath the moon, in other words, but doesn't work when you start explaining the heavens. And when you start looking at the heavens, the spheres of the heavens, it doesn't make sense. And Rambam is going to, and so therefore Rambam says that since we know what's going on in the heavens, right? Obviously, he was completely wrong about how he explained the spheres, but he thought that Rambam and all the people in those days thought they understood that the heavens were these spheres made of some sort of matter, and embedded in these spheres were the celestial bodies, the stars, etc. So, and that they were all rotating around, one above it or below the other one. So we know what's there, but it doesn't follow the rules of science, right? And because it doesn't follow the rules of science, it makes more sense to say that things aren't the way they are because they have to be, but rather they are the way they are because God created a world this way. That's essentially the argument that Rambam is going to make in this chapter, but it's going to be a little bit lengthy, but I'm going to run through it because it's important, even though it might not be the most exciting, but let's do it anyway. So here he's going to lay out the propositions of science that Aristotle uses that make sense to explain the world that we see, but doesn't work when you try to explain the heavens that way. It's kind of like what we call today when people debate religion versus science. Rambam is kind of making a God of the gaps argument. So it's not something that really works well for many of us today. But let's see how let's do it anyway. A proposition universally agreed upon, accepted by Aristotle on page 317, and by all those who have philosophized, reads as follows: it is impossible that anything but a single simple thing should proceed from a simple thing. So if something is extremely simple and it's the cause for something else, that it could only cause something simple. If the thing is composite, then what proceeds from it can be several things. Okay, so his example, I'm reading through it quickly. I'm not reading word for word just because I want to get through this. So, for instance, what proceeds from fire? So, in their physiology of those days, I'm sorry, physics, not physiology. I'm using the wrong term. The two qualities in fire: heat and dryness. Okay, so they have it combined is the action of heating by means of its heat and drying by means of its dryness. So fire will accomplish those two things. Similarly, in the case of a thing composed of matter and form, everything has matter and form. Matter is the stuff that it's made out of, and form is the shape and function and what makes it, right? So something that makes a table, that's the form, right? Certain things proceed from it in respect to its matter, right? If the table, well, it's not the best example, but it can affect and cause something based because of its matter, or certain other things in respect to its form because of what it can do, of what it is, right? So it is of multiple composition. In accordance with this proposition, Aristotle says that what first proceeded from God was constituted by a single simple intellect only. Since God is simple intellect, God is not complex, right? God is not multifaceted because there's only one, right? It's the simplest of the simple. So the only thing that could come from God, remember, this is Aristotle's thinking, right? Because Aristotle is applying the laws of physics to God, right? Which is the fundamental difference between Maimonides and Aristotle. Aristotle says everything happens because it has to be. So if the laws of physics apply to God, then this law of simple things can only make simple things must apply to God too. So that's proposition number one. Proposition number two, a second. Anything at random does not proceed from any other thing at random, but there's a conformity between cause and effect. In other words, A causes B because A has to cause B, right? That's how science works, right? So even in the case of accidents, when we see the word accidents, right? We were talking about like a mikra, right? The chance, right? That a thing is the way it is. One accident at random does not proceed from any other accident at random, as would be the case if, for instance, if so an accident, I often say is really a quality. So like if I say that that thing is red, that would be an accident. Like, why is that red? If that thing is big, that's an accident. I know it's not doesn't work well for our terminology, but for medieval philosophy, it works that way. So I can't say that a quantity proceeds from a quality, right? That if something is red, maybe it can rub off and make something else red, right? That's a quality making a quality. But something red rubbing against something doesn't make a thousand things. It just doesn't make sense to describe it that way. So a third thing that I'm going to lay down, proposition: every agent acting in virtue of purpose and will and not in virtue of its nature, right? In other words, if something has to do something, then it can only do that thing which it has to do, right? But if something has will, in other words, and can decide to do something else, then that person or being can say today, oh, today I'm going to go around the block once, tomorrow I'm going to go around the block twice, the next day I'm not going to go around the block at all, right? So you can decide to do different kinds of things. A fourth proposition: a whole and I'm just going to say it in my own words, that a whole is more than the sum of its parts, right? So in other words, if you take a nerve and a bone and a piece of flesh and an artery and a vein, and you pile them, line them up on a table next to each other, then all you have, and you put them in a box, all you have is a bone, a nerve, a muscle, a vein, and an artery, right? But if you put it all together and make a hand, then it's really cool. Now you have a hand. So the whole is more than just the sum of its parts. Okay, those are the four propositions. Having set forth these premises, I say, with regard to Aristotle's statement that the first intellect is the cause of the second and the second is the third, right? So I'm going to jump through this, right? So how then can the composition come to exist, right? Right. In other words, how could anything ever be complex, right? If God is simple and can only make simple things, then how could it be complex? Mind you, that I'm going to warn you or give you a tip that at the end of this, Rambam is going to admit that none of these things he's saying against Aristotle are necessarily proofs, because you can probably try to argue them out and figure out other ways around them. He's trying to show indications, right? So everything should be simple. So how does complexity ever happen? And then he says on the fourth line now on page 318, we shall concede to him all that he says concerning a composition of various notions coming about in the intellects. So then he says, well, the way Aristotle tries to deal with this is by saying that the spheres of the heavens are moved by an intellect that's deciding to move them. Remember, Rambam also subscribed to this theory, which was then a scientific idea, that there's anything to move, somebody or some creature has to decide to move it. Some intellect has to decide to move it. So therefore, since that thing can decide, those spheres have intellects that decide multiple things, which become more and more complex and multiple as we get closer and closer to the world that we're in. So Rambam says, but even if we grant him this guess and conjecture, how can the intellects be the cause for the possession of the spheres from them? These intellects are just intellects, right? How do they cause there to be actual matter, right? So what relation, right? I can't just make something come into existence, right? I can decide to move a table back and forth, right? Right? But I can't just create matter by wishing it into existence because I have an intellect. And what relation can there be between matter and that being, which is separate being, which is no matter at all, meaning the ultimate intellect, God, or any of the intellects that run these spheres? And supposing that we can see the cause of every sphere in intellect, in as much as so the third issue is, if intellect, I'm going to read it, I'm going to tell it to you in my own words. If an intellect can create another intellect, and matter can affect and cause the creation of other matter, right? How is it that one sphere gets more complex than the next one? Because in Rambam's and in Aristotelian physics, and I'm skipping to the end of this long paragraph right now, I'm just going to say it outside. The spheres are made up of a substance, and within that substance is embedded stars. So there's several substances. So if the uppermost sphere has nothing in it, how does that create something that's more complex as you go down and down the ladder? All right. So these are all questions that Rambam has on Aristotle's explanation. The bottom line of this all is, and if you wanted to, we obviously our view today of physics is so vastly different than this that reading this kind of sounds what doesn't work, right, for us. But we got to do this anyway to understand how the Rambam came to his conclusion. So here we are. So accordingly, I'm at the second paragraph on 318. It has become clear to you that these things do not conform to the conception of necessity that he says forth. The bottom line is that Aristotle's explanations don't work, or they don't work well when you're talking about the heavens. Similarly, the diversity of the motions of the spheres, and we talked about that a couple of chapters ago. There is furthermore another point that ruins everything that has been established with regard to natural things, if the state of the heavens is considered. Right? Another point that I'm going to say when we're talking about the heavens that don't make sense in Aristotelian physics. And what Rambam is really saying is that science of my day, of Rambam's day, doesn't explain the heavens very well. And that's something that we know, right? Because of it, the heavens didn't make sense, we eventually advanced to the understanding that we have today of the heavens, which makes much more sense. We still have problems, of course, but it makes much more sense than Rambam's understanding. For if the matter of the spheres is one and the same, then why is it necessary for the form of one particular sphere to be transferred to the matter of another, in accord with what happens beneath the sphere of the moon because of the aptitude of matter? So, like, in other words, why is it that all of a sudden in the bottommost sphere where we are, this world was created, and not up there in one of those other spheres, right? Why did each sphere make another sphere with stars in it, another sphere with stars in it, another sphere with stars in it? Then all of a sudden, a sphere with the lowest star, which is the moon, in it. And then all of a sudden, there's a world with the planet and life and trees and birds and animals, right? Why all of a sudden this sphere did it create all of this stuff and not in those spheres up above, right? And why is one particular form permanently in one particular matter, although the matter of all is common? If all of it is made out of the same stuff, then why is what we see here so different than what happens over there? Unless by God, someone asserts that the matter of every sphere is other than that of others, unless you're going to tell me that there's different kinds of matter in each one. So in that case, the form of the motion of the spheres would be indicative of their matter. And this would be the ruin of all principles. And then all the rules of science just went out the window. Furthermore, if the matter of all the stars is one and the same, then why are they sometimes different, right? Right? Is it by their forms or by accidents? In either case, it would be necessary that the forms or accidents in question should be transferred one after the other to each of the stars. So hereby it becomes clear to you that when we say the matter of the spheres or the matter of the stars, these expressions contain none of the meaning of that matter here, right? So in other words, when we talk about it, it's so different than what we see here in the sphere that we live in today. Okay, so and then he talks again about motion. I'm again going to skip to the end of the paragraph. So now that he established that all of this doesn't make sense, he's going to get to his point. So I'm going to try something. I'm not sure if this is going to work, but I'm going to try to compare it to today, right? So I've said several times that today, science in the last 3 to 4 decades has gotten to a point where we boil down pretty much the explanation of just about everything to the constants of nature, right? The constants are the equations and the mathematical values of the different forces and that make up the basis of the universe. And on the basis of those constants, a physicist can pretty much calculate, almost anything, right? Except for the few things that are still being worked on, right? So we don't know why they are the way they are. They just are that way, right? Science has determined what they are, but not why they are that way. And what Rambam is saying is really the same thing with Aristotle, only on a much more primitive scientific level, right? That Aristotle might have explained to us the heavens and how it all works on this world here. And it might all be working on this world, but everything up there in the heavens, we don't know why it is the way it is, because all of those rules can't apply to that. They don't tell us why. So the Rambam says, if we believe that it is produced through the purpose of one who purposed, made, and particularized it, if we say that the reason why it was done that way is because the creator decided to make it that way, right? None of these questions affect us, right? So then I don't have a problem, right? All of these questions, I can explain what's happening. And if you want to know why, it happened because God decided that this is the kind of universe that he wants. So he made it this way. This is an opinion that does not agree with the order of that which exists, an opinion in favor of which no cause and no new persuasive proof have been brought forward. With all very disgraceful, I'm going to read this paragraph in his words. I missed a little. Starting from the beginning of the middle paragraph on 319. If, however, we believe that all this has been produced through the purpose of one who purposed, made, and particularized it, as his wisdom, which cannot be grasped, required, none of these questions affect us. Whereas they do affect him who claims that all of this has come out through necessity, right? If you say that it's all through necessity, then you have to explain it all, and not through the will of one who wills. In other words, this is an opinion. If you agree with that, then that does not agree with the order of that which exists, because it doesn't appear to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't make sense. Why does it have to be that way? In modern physics language, is why does Avogadro's number have to be whatever it is, I don't remember, but why does the strong nuclear force have to be exactly as strong and as weak as it is, and the weak nuclear force have to be exactly as strong or as weak as it is? Why does the gravity have to be exactly this number, right? We don't know why, right? Unless you say that it was made that way for a reason, right? In order to make a world that is the world that we live in, because a creator decided that that's the world that he wants, right? So, namely, it would follow that the deity, whom everyone who is intelligent recognizes to be perfect in every kind of perfection, could, as far as all the beings are concerned, produce nothing new in any of them. In other words, if you're going with Aristotle's way, then God could never do anything else. The only thing he can do is the things that science dictates. If he wished to lengthen a fly's wing or to shorten a worm's foot, he would not be able to do it, right? But Aristotle will say that he would not wish it. It's not a matter of whether or not he wants to do it or could do it. He wouldn't do it, right? because it is impossible for him to will something different from what is. Because remember, Aristotle's whole idea is that everything is the way it is because it has to be. And Rambam is saying, no, everything is the way it is because that's how God created it. Okay. So I shall sum up for your benefit. Hold on one second. And though I know that many men imbued with a partisan spirit shall tax me because of the statement, either with having but little comprehension of the argument or with deliberately deviating from it, yet I shall not because of that refrain from saying what I in my inadequacy have apprehended and understood. Accordingly, the summing up will be as follows. Let me explain you a summary of what I just said. Okay, so I'm at the bottom paragraph on 319. Everything that Aristotle has said about all that exists from beneath the sphere of the moon to the center of the earth is indubitably correct. Okay. Remember, I summarized it this way too when I started teaching this chapter. Now Rambam is telling this, right? Everything that we see around us, we got it. Okay. It's fun. It's kind of interesting hearing that today when their science was so off what we know today. But okay, Rambam is saying we got that, and Aristotle makes sense, and he's totally right. Okay. And no one will deviate from it unless he doesn't understand it, or he has some other preconceived opinion that he wants to defend, or lead him to the denial of a thing that is manifest. On the other hand, everything that Aristotle expounds with regard to the sphere of the moon and that which is above it is, except for certain things, something analogous to guessing and conjecturing. We don't know what's going on up there. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work. All the more so does this apply to what he says about the order of the intellects and to some of the opinions regarding the divine that he believes. So all that stuff is stuff that just doesn't work. Do not criticize me for having set out the doubts that attach to this opinion, right? So you may say, can doubts disprove an opinion or establish its contrary as true? This is a very important paragraph, and I want you to listen to this carefully. In case I lost you on all the philosophical stuff, zero in on this one, because this is really important, right? So you're going to come out to me and say, you just laid out all of these doubts. You asked all these questions on Aristotle. The fact that you don't have the answers to these questions, does that disprove Aristotle? Right? Surely this is not so, right? In other words, that it's not true that just because I have doubts, that doesn't make Aristotle necessarily wrong. It just means I don't know the answer yet. This is a powerful thing. So the Rambam is saying clearly, and he repeatedly said this. And I remember a couple of weeks ago, Billy asked me from one place where it sounded like he was saying something else. And I promised that I'd show you that the Rambam very clearly states many times that I never really disprove Aristotle, right? So how could I list you all of these doubts about Aristotle and claim that this proves? So the Rambam is saying, no, I'm not claiming that it proves. I'm just bringing up these doubts because of the following. I'm going to treat this philosopher as his followers have enjoined us to treat him. I am going to raise doubts because that's what philosophers do. They raise doubts about ideas, right? For Alexander, as explained, in every case in which no demonstration is possible, right? If you don't have a proof, if you can't scientifically prove one of the opinions, right? The two contrary opinions with regard to the matter in question should be posited as hypotheses, right? If there's an earth world and there's two possible explanations, an eternal world versus a created world, Aristotle's world versus Rambam's world, right? So then we should assume both are hypotheses. It could be this, it could be that. And then it should be seen what doubts attach to each of them. And then you look at each one and see what problems do I have with this one and what problems do I have with that one. The one to which fewer doubts attached should be believed. And I should go with the one that sounds better because there's less questions about it. The one that smells more like the truth. Okay? So all I'm telling you when I'm raising these doubts is I'm not claiming that I proved it. There's no demonstration. That's the Rambam's words for absolute proof. Alexander says that things are thus with respect to all opinions regarding the divine that Aristotle sets forth, and regarding with no demonstration is possible. For everyone who has come after Aristotle says that what Aristotle stated about them raises fewer doubts than whatever else might be said about them. So everyone else that goes with Aristotle says that his way sounds the best. So we have acted in this way when it was to our mind established as true that regarding questions whether the heavens are generated or eternal, neither of the two contrary opinions could be demonstrated. I understand that I cannot demonstrate, I cannot prove to you. I don't have a measuring stick that can prove. I don't have a camera that's been running for 15 billion years that can show you what exactly happened in the heavens. whether or not it's eternal or created, Rambam says. Remember, Rambam's not talking about what we know today about Big Bangs and stuff. He's talking about Aristotle's eternal world or created world. For we have explained the doubts attaching to each of the opinions, and have shown to you that the opinion favoring the eternity of the world is the one that raises more doubts and is more harmful for the belief that ought to be held with regard to the deity. So then, because the opinion of Aristotle has so many more problems with it, it's better to go with the idea, like I'm trying to suggest, that the world was created by a creator. In addition to the fact that the world's being produced in time is the opinion of Avraham Avinu and our prophet Moshe, right? May be peace be upon them. The fact that the Torah supports that opinion in the words, in the two main prophets in Rambam's theology, the two primary prophets are Avraham Avinu and Moshe Rabbeinu. So, and each had a different type of contribution, which there's been essays written about the Abrahamic religion and the Mosaic religion, but we can get to that another time in Rambam's thought. But the two of them together make up the main prophets that form the foundation of our religion. So therefore, in other words, so Rambam is saying, I have not proved it to you, but I've brought up enough doubts about Aristotle to make you think, you know what? This creator thing makes philosophical sense. Rambam in previous chapters that we did previously together shows that it's possible. There's no scientific proof that it's not true that there's a creator, right? It's probable that there's a creator, and it makes more sense to think that way. But a proof I don't have, right? But also, our prophets teach us this, and the Torah teaches us that. So that should carry some weight. And that's the last thing the Rambam says. Now, I'm going to go to, as we have mentioned, that opinions should be examined by means of the doubts. I see fit to explain to you something with regard to that. Let me talk to you about something. Now, this you guys are going to find very relevant in chapter 23 to just about anything today. And even pick your favorite extremely controversial political subject. You can imagine in your minds which one it is. I'm not going to say it because I don't want anyone to construe what my opinions are about any particular topic. But pick something that if you had a room full of random 40 people, you'd have 20 people screaming yes and 20 people screaming no, and then get all angry at each other and they'd vote for somebody else. Okay? That kind of issue. All right? So no, that one. So Rambam is going to tell us a little bit about opinions about issues. All right, so there's a hand up. Go ahead.
Maybe this is an unfair question, but if Maimonides were living today and could see what I consider to be scientific proof that the creation story with the Big Bang and the Hubble telescope and all the enormous number of people dedicated to this proposition, wouldn't he find that there's little doubt that the creation story is in fact verifiable, and that all this theoretical stuff from the 12th century or 13th, whatever the 13th century?
I think so. I think that's what I've mentioned many times that it's very dangerous to answer that question. What would the Rambam have done if, right? But I certainly agree with you that that's true, but I have no way to prove that, obviously. The one thing that is clear from the Rambam, and is from what we're reading now, what we're about to read in a minute, is that the search for truth was paramount, right? So the Rambam would have analyzed this subject by learning everything he could possibly learn about it and knowing everything he could possibly know about it. And the one thing he would never do is come to his opinion because of one little argument or some guy said at some point that sounded good. The Rambam would, and that's important because he's going to teach us in a minute, how do you handle it when you have two conflicting explanations for something and they conflict? How do you get past your own personal biases, right? And he's going to talk about that in a minute. And this is so extremely relevant today because just let me read it, and I'm telling you, it'll really shine a light onto anything, because we all have these today. So many times there's so many subjects like that, where you have two opinions and the opinions are diametrically opposed and everyone on each side are screaming and yelling their opinion at the other one. How do you get past that, right? How as a human being, as a person, can you get past that? He's not giving advice to society, but he's telling you, how do you get past that, right? So here we go. Know that when one compares the doubts attaching to a certain opinion with those attaching to the contrary opinion, and has to decide which of them arouses fewer doubts. In other words, I told you, right? In last chapter, if I could prove it to you, if it's prove it to you scientifically factual, then there's no thing to debate about, right? I'm talking about when you have two arguments and I can't prove it to you, right? And each one has doubts. Okay, so and you're trying to compare those two doubts in order to decide which one has fewer doubts. One should not take into account the number of the doubts, right? In other words, it's the fact that there's 100 TikTok videos that say yes, each one 1 minute long, and there's one TikTok video that says no, right? Well, if that's not, that shouldn't be what makes your decision, right? Whether there's more doubts raised about one versus the other, right? One should not taking out the number, but rather consider how great is their incongruity and what in their is their disagreement with what exists. In other words, listen to what's being said and try to decide how important are the points being made, how strong, how incongruous. When you bring up this doubt, how incongruous does that make this opinion from the truth? Sometimes a single doubt is more powerful than 1,000 other doubts. Sometimes you can have 1,000 people saying, what about this? What about this? What about this? But they're all tiny little minor points that don't really make that much of a difference. But the one big issue really takes it down, makes the difference. Furthermore, this comparison can be, and this is so important. I mean, it's so obvious, but so important. Furthermore, this comparison can be correctly made only by someone for whom the two contraries are equal. You can only make this decision if you take an objective look at each side. But whoever prefers one of the two opinions because of his upbringing, say you have an opinion because you were born, let's say it's in the fight between India and Pakistan. If you were born an Indian and you were raised in India, and you're going to be wedded to that opinion, right? And you're only going to see it in that light, right? Because of your upbringing or for some advantage, or you were born to a family that makes money out of oil, so you're just wedded to the opinion that oil has nothing to do with climate change because your whole livelihood depends on it, and you won't change your mind even though you're presented with a solid other opinion because you need that opinion to be true, right? So those two reasons, either your upbringing or some advantage that accrues to you because of holding that opinion. While one who entertains an unfounded predilection cannot make himself oppose a matter susceptible of demonstration, right? If someone is trying to think about unfounded predilection, in other words, he has a predilection which is not based on fact, right? He can't make himself oppose a matter susceptible of demonstration. In matters like those under discussion, such an opposition is often possible, right? Sometimes, if you wish it, though, and there's the key thing that Rambam is saying, if you really want to get past those biases, those personal biases that we all bring to the table, right? We believe in certain things because we want them to be true because it's easier for us to continue our comfortable lives thinking that it's true, right? Or we want them to be true because that's what all of our family has taught us since we were childhood, and to challenge those beliefs is difficult, right? The way to do it is as follows. You can rid yourself of an unfounded predilection, right? You can rid yourself of those predilections to believe something that isn't necessarily true. Free yourself of what is habitual. Free yourself of believing in something simply because it's your habit, because that's what you've always believed. Rely solely on speculation and rely completely on your own mind and thought, and prefer the opinion that you ought to prefer and stick with the opinion that you should stick with, right? However, how to do this, you must fulfill several conditions. There's certain things you have to do in order to rise above those predilections. And I listen to Rambam really careful because this is going to really help to kind of focus, like, because we all come across these issues, especially when we come across issues that we already have preformed opinions that are so deeply embedded within us that we're not willing to even try to think about what possible the other side is. But here's how you do it. Here's Rambam's instructions on how you do it. The first of them is that you should know how good your mind is and that your inborn disposition is sound. In other words, recognize your biases. Start off and recognize what those biases are. You need to know yourself first, right? So know how smart you are, right? Know how easy it is for you to trick yourself. Know why it is, what the reasons are why you think the way they are. This becomes clear to you. And how do you do that? How do you know yourself? In training in all the mathematical sciences and through grasp of the rules of logic. You have to study, you have to learn, right? You have to learn logic, you have to learn how logic works. And that's how you train your brain. And that's how you know your brain. You know your capabilities. So the first thing is knowing your capabilities. It's really two things in the first thing is knowing your capabilities and knowing your biases. So keep that down straight up. The second condition is to have knowledge of the natural sciences, is learn the knowledge, the information, the natural sciences, learn them, right? If you're going to have an argument about something in this world, so if you're going to have a debate, I don't know, about abortion, for example, I'm sorry, I said I wasn't going to bring up a lively subject, but I did. But first, know what you're talking about. Know how embryos develop. Know why some women want abortions. Know what the side effects are. Know what the dangers are. Know why why in some cases it might be good, why it's bad. What are its effects on society? What are its effects on the women? Know the facts, right? Know the science before you start babbling, right? Know it. And to apprehend their truth so that you should know your doubts and the true reality. You can't assess the doubts when somebody comes to you and says, I'm pro this or I'm anti that, right? You can't assess that if you don't know the subject. It should be such a simple thing. So number one, know your biases. Number two, know yourself. Number three, know the subject. Okay? The third condition concerns your morals. And this is crucial. This is the third, which is really the fourth, because the first one was two-pronged. Be a moral person, right? If you don't have a moral compass, then you're not going to pick the right side, right? So know what's right and what's wrong. For whenever a man finds himself inclining, and to our mind, it makes no difference if this happens because of his natural disposition or because of an acquired characteristic, right? Towards lusts and pleasures, right? If you're following a certain subject and you're going to a certain side because it fulfills some lust or some pleasure or some need that you have, whether that's money or sexual lust or power or greed, whatever lust it might be, right? If that's what's driving you, that's immoral. And you need to realize that if you're leaning in a certain direction because you make more money that way, then that might not be the right way to go, right? So giving the upper hand or preferring anger and fury. If you're and we know so many of us know of movements today that are run on anger, and politicians that use anger as the way they whip up the crowds. People have a tendency, people love to be angry. People love to get up and scream and scream and scream and yell anger, right? It's a lust, right? Rambam is listing that under lusts, right? It's and if that's why you're picking your opinion because it helps you be angry and get that thing out of your system or whipping it up within your system more like, right? Then you should be questioning, that's not moral, right? That's not a moral way to make decisions as to what side to be on. Giving the upper hand to irascible factoring, letting go of its reins. And then what happens is you give the upper hand to the faculty in your brain that makes irascible decisions, right? It lets go of its reins, no control on your decisions. You just run with what's angry, the mob tendency, right? He shall be at fault and stumble wherever he goes. If a person allows himself to make decisions based on immoral concerns, any one of the things we listed, he's going to end up having the wrong opinion. For he shall seek opinions that will help him in that toward which his nature inclines. That person is going to choose the opinions which drives him in the direction that his nature wants to go, rather it's the place that's the truth. I have drawn your attention to this in order that you should not be deceived. The reason why I'm bringing this up, Rambam says, is because I don't want you to be deceived. When you have to look at a topic or a subject, and this is so true to every single subject we ever have to deal with, know yourself. I mean, we should write these down on our brains, right? It should be like a mantra. Know yourself. Know your biases, right? Know the subject matter, right? Know the subject matter, and be moral. Those are the four things, right? Use a moral compass when you're trying to decide which side to go with. Don't follow lust or anger, etc. Okay. So now let's go back to the topic that we're actually talking about, which is the subject of, did God create the world, or is the world the way it is because that's the way it is because that's the way it has to be, right? Aristotle versus Maimonides. Which one is the right one, Rambam says. And it's if you thought, I hope you enjoyed this so far, this chapter, but let's see what goes on even further, right? Because this is not just relevant to medieval philosophy. This is relevant to us every single day, multiple times a day, as we confront the world around us. And this is timeless Rambam. So I've drawn your attention to this in order that you should not be deceived. For someone may someday lead you into vain imaginings through setting forth a doubt concerning the creation of the world and time. Someone's going to come to you and tell you there was no creator, right? Remember, the Rambam is bringing back to this subject and bring up some doubt about it. Remember, the Rambam said, there's doubts about both sides, right? And he'll bring up a good question, a good question about God, about why should you believe in God? And he'll fill in the blank with whatever complaint he's thing he's going to say. And you may be very quick to let yourself be deceived. And you're going to be tricked by him into thinking that he's right. And you, assuming you are a believing Jew, if you're not, that whatever, but if you are, that's Rambam's making that assumption, you might be deceived, right? For in this opinion is contained I don't want you to be deceived, because once you think that the world is the way it is because it has to be, and there's no creator, it is the destruction of the foundation of the law, right? And a presumptuous assertion with regard to the deity. Number one, it destroys the entire Torah. And number two, so in other words, there's a huge effect of thinking that there's no creator, right? Destroys the Torah. And also, it's a presumptuous assertion. You are, and this is really, really, really important. You're making a presumptuous assertion about God with regard to the deity. What does that mean? You lose humility, right? Because one who knows there's a creator, who understands that the world is here for a purpose, understands that each and every one of us is here for a purpose and for a reason, right? Understands that we need to be humble. When you recognize that there's a deity and a creator, it's impossible for us to even remotely imagine how incredible that deity is that can create something like this. That creates in us a tremendous humility. If you remember, the Rambam starts off, he starts off his Sefer Mishnah Torah by telling us exactly this idea, which is the foundation of Judaism. Look at the world around you and then think about he who created the world, and be impressed with such a tremendous amount of awe that you're filled with a tremendous amount of humility. So this presumptuousness is what you're at risk of. It's gava, it's arrogance that you're at risk of attaining if you take Aristotle's path. This is a crucial point in Maimonidean philosophy. I haven't done this yet, but I've been collecting material. Maybe one day I'll have the time to do it, but I want to write a book about how humility is the underlying theme of Moreh Nevuchah. That humility is the bottom line. But we can talk about that another. This is one of those points. Be therefore always suspicious in your mind as to this point, and accept the authority of the two prophets. Think about it. Think about the two prophets. Remember those two, the key prophets in Rambam's philosophy, which is Moshe and Avram, right? Who are the pillars of the well-being of the human species with regard to its beliefs and associations. Listen to Rambam's words. This is crucial. The philosophy of Avram Avinu and Moshe Rabbeinu is the pillar of the well-being of humanity, not just Jews, right? The ideas that they expressed is crucial for the well-being of humanity. That humility, right, is so important for all of us. Do not turn away from the opinion according to which the world is new. Don't go running around and thinking that the world wasn't created, except because of a demonstration, unless someone were to prove it to you, right? Because a proof is always a proof. However, now such a demonstration does not exist in nature. Don't worry. No one's going to ever prove to you there's no such thing as a God, because no such proof exists. The Rambam is here saying, fascinatingly, I'll admit, if somebody were to scientifically prove to me that there is no such thing as God, then fine. But no such proof exists. I see a hand up, but I want to finish because it's really, we'll have time, I promise, for questions. But so then the Rambam says something, it's kind of a little bit funny, but it's beautiful also. So he's thinking, so I'm using all of this rhetorical things about Moshe and Avram, and the world rests on this. The Rambam, he just walked outside of himself. He was this rational, thinking through everything logically, listing all of the propositions and making conclusions from propositions. He was a very boring professor, and then all of a sudden he got animated with this speech, this fiery speech. It doesn't sound very Maimonidean, right? So you might some Rambam, hold off. This is what Rambam is thinking. Someone is going to raise his hand and say, "Whoa, Rabbi Moshe, hang on, why are you getting into all this? Is just speech. This is fiery speech stuff. You're trying to convince people by sounding good. That doesn't work. You're a scientist, right? Tell us the facts." So you're going to criticize me for giving a fiery speech. Rambam says the student of this treatise should not engage in criticism because of my using this rhetorical mode of speech in order to support the affirmation of the newness of the world. I know that I'm giving a fiery speech that doesn't necessarily make scientific points, right? And I'm impassioned about this speech. I realize that I'm using this rhetorical method in order to drive home the importance of this. So don't criticize me for it. Because even Aristotle, the prince of philosophers, in his main writings has likewise used rhetorical speeches in support of his opinion that the world is eternal. It's okay. Even the scientists will talk about these things. Even Aristotle will use these methods. The bottom line is, what I'm telling you relies on logic and science and study and reason. However, okay, I'm just using this because I'm trying to drive a point home, and I'm using this method. In such cases, it may truly be said, shall our perfect Torah be not worth as much as their frivolous talk? In other words, if the Goyim can use it to support their ideas, if the non-Jews can do that, then certainly for the Torah, I can use such methods in order to pound home and these ideas. If he refers in support of his opinion to the ravings of the Sabians are the quintessential polytheistic pagans, right? And Aristotle blasted them and used rhetorical speeches to blast them and believe in only one God. So how can we but refer in support of our opinion of the words of Moses and Abraham and to everything that follows therefrom? If I get a little passionate about Moshe Rabbeinu and Avram Avinu, give me a pass, is what Rambam says. I can get a little passionate. I can give a good speech because I'm trying to drive home a point. I have promised you a chapter in which I shall expound to you the grave doubts that would affect whoever thinks that man who has acquired knowledge as to the arrangement of the motions of the sphere and as to their being natural things going on according to the law of necessity, things whose order and arrangement are clear. I shall now explain this to you. So the next one, he's going to go into more astronomical matters. So after this really, really, really incredibly powerful and beautiful chapter, we're going to get back down into medieval astronomy. But as I told you, I'm not giving up. We're going to learn every single chapter in here, whether it's it doesn't matter, but that'll be next time. I hope you enjoyed this at least as much as I did, but now I'll open the floor for questions.
I have a quick question, which I deferred. I'll go back to the top of 122, where he says, do not turn away from the opinions according to which the world is new, except because of a demonstration. And here's the sentence. Now, such a demonstration does not exist in nature. Again, right. Now, such a demonstration does not exist in nature. Well, wouldn't the scientists and the astrophysicists that I'm friendly with say, of course, a demonstration exists in nature to prove that there is a creator? Now, we're not talking about God here. We're talking about this question of the eternity.
Well, I mean, I don't know what the consensus of scientists would be if you asked them that question. But what Rambam is saying is fascinating from several levels. First of all, he says, don't turn away from the opinion that the world is new. In other words, there's a creator. Unless someone were to prove to you scientifically that God doesn't exist, right? And there is no such proof that God doesn't exist. So the Rambam is saying is that in theory, if the scientists were to prove that God doesn't exist, then I would accept that.
But why do you jump to God doesn't exist? We've been talking about the creation of the world and the question of whether it was created or whether it's eternal. I mean, that doesn't involve a question of God as such.
Okay, you're right. A creator exists is a better word. I said it should.
Well, but he's not been talking. I haven't heard creator. He's been talking about creation. Is the world?
We did in previous chapters talk about that. Is God, according to Aristotle, God is not a creator, right? Because the world always has been, right? And has to be created,
okay,
right? If the world was created then God is not just the prime mover in like he is in Aristotle's world, but he's a creator. But even so, I mean, the bottom line, let's either way, whether do not turn away from the opinion according to which the world is new. Fine. So the world being created. Don't turn away from that opinion that the world was created.
Now,
Right?
such a demonstration does not exist in nature, but the scientists will tell you that it does exist in nature. That's why they have the telescopes.
Okay. Yes. Nowadays, we do have. We know that the world is new. That the world had a moment of creation, which we call the Big Bang. Right. So, but that's not something that Rambam would ever have known. Right.
Right.
Right. Now, wait a minute. What does not exist in nature is that a proof that the world is not new. In other words, you cannot prove to me that the world is eternal. That's what the Rambam is saying, right?
Well,
if you were to prove it, right? So
I don't know. I just said he's suggesting that you can't, in nature, based on observation, prove this. And
yeah, but let me read. I'm going to read it again. Do not turn away from the opinion according to which the world is new, right? In other words, stick with the opinion that the world is created, right? Unless there's except because of a demonstration, unless somebody proved to you that the world is eternal, right?
Right.
Such a demonstration, in other words, a demonstration that the world is eternal does not exist.
Well, okay.
Right. You cannot prove to me that the world is eternal.
Okay. Okay, we'll move on. I understand.
Okay. I see some more hands, so go ahead.
I have a question about the third, I guess, criteria or condition. Let me see if I can find it here. The third condition concerns your morals.
Yes.
Is the Rambam making an assumption here that there is one standard set of morality? Because in the real world, there are all kinds of different sets, codes of morality that people may have or may ascribe to that are very different from each other. A criminal has a code of morality which says, you know, what's yours is mine, and so on, but no productive.
Well, so Maimonides is referring to Maimonidean understanding of morals, right? And his understanding of morals, and that would be best learned from the Sefer Armada. If you learn, you know, in the Mishnah Torah, where he talks about his morals, it's similar to Aristotelian, but it's the idea that if you're basing your if you are basing your decisions on selfish reasons, for lust, for pleasure, for power, or for anger, for any one of these emotions, as opposed when you're using your heart instead of your mind, right? That is immoral. Mind would be moral. In other words, using your mind, deciding to do what's right. Now, if your mind is making decisions because of your heart, right? And that's Maimonidean morals. I mean, there's obviously more to it. It's a very short version, but so that's what he's referring to here. So in other words, when you're trying to decide which opinion I'm going to go with, right? If it's your heart, meaning your desire for any one of those things, right? He's not necessarily saying that there's anything wrong with pleasure or even anger on some cases, maybe, right? But if that's what's driving you, right, then you're not going to make a good decision as to which side to be on in this whatever debate it is, right?
Right.
You know, and that's really what he's saying, and it's, I think this is timeless wisdom. You know, I think we should really all think about these things because it applies to every issue I can imagine. Any other questions, comments? All right, so I think that will conclude lecture number 70. Barry, did you want to say something? No? Okay. So, and thank you for your compliments in the chat. I appreciate it. So, so we'll close out for today, and it's been a really fun. So next week we'll, Mirta Shem, God willing, do chapter 23. And I'm sorry, we just did chapter 23. We're going to do chapter 24, and it'll be lecture 71. We're really rocking. This has been a great run. Okay, so you all have a wonderful night. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Loved it.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.